We know that the past few months have been rough, to say the least, and that events of the world have us all sticking close to home. But WHYY's virtual events are a wonderful way to join your fellow public media fans to watch and listen to a good conversation by some of the best in the business. And we are excited to have a powerhouse with us tonight. We're thrilled and honored to welcome anchor and managing editor of the PBS NewsHour, Judy Woodruff, who somehow made the time in her extraordinarily busy schedule to talk with us. It goes without saying that we've got plenty to talk about, and we know you will enjoy the coming conversation. Our events are just one of the ways the WHYY tries to connect with each of you. Through our radio, television, and digital offerings, WHYY supplies this region with trusted news and entertainment when and how you want it. Information about all of our offerings can be found on WHYY.org. So if you want to find our latest news or want to get tickets to our virtual events with great names like Bob Costa and Rick Steves, don't forget to visit our website. And while you're there, please consider supporting your local public media station with a donation. It's because of your support that we're able to connect with you with thought-provoking information and dialogue. We want to thank you and thank our board members for being here as well. And by the way, feel free to submit questions for the Q&A portion of our program. So, Judy, welcome, and it's wonderful to see you.
Thank you so much, Sandy. I'm delighted to be with all of you. I'm at my home where we are broadcasting the NewsHour. Sandy and I were just discussing, I'm here for the duration. I've been here since April, except we did go into the studio for the conventions, the Republican and Democratic conventions, and then for debate nights and election night. But otherwise, we are 99% of us are remote, working from home.
You know, it's amazing how the world kind of turned on its head so quickly with a convergence of so many things. I cannot think of a better time to be in conversation with you, Judy. You know, the collective stress of a nation is in full view. We're in the middle of a health pandemic that's claimed more than 200,000 lives in the U.S. We have protests in cities in rural America demanding a racial reckoning. We have economic distress, a Supreme Court fight, voter suppression, the legitimizing of white supremacy from the highest office in the land. We're virtual everything. And oh yeah, that's right, there's a presidential election coming up in unprecedented times. And so I wouldn't dare ask you to make sense of any of it. But how are you, thank you. But how are you processing all of this?
Wow. Well, you named the stories of our time. The pandemic, of course, has affected every single American. None of us has ever lived through anything like this, although I guess there are some remaining Americans who lived through the Spanish flu of the early 1900s, but that was a long time ago. Most Americans have never been through anything like this. And as you mentioned, it's affected our health. It's affected our lives. We have lost now over 200,000 Americans to this terrible virus, and the death toll internationally, as we know, is over 1 million. It's affected our livelihoods. People have lost jobs. We're reporting tonight on the NewsHour about enormous layoffs now in the airline industry, in one industry after another. It's a, I hate to use the word, but a bloodbath for many American sectors, economic sectors. We are living through an extraordinary time, as you say, also, Sandy, a racial reckoning in this country in the aftermath of the death of George Floyd at the hands of police. And that is an issue in this presidential campaign. And by the way, we are in a campaign. We saw our first debate just 2 nights ago, where President Trump and former Vice President Biden came together on at a stage in Cleveland, Ohio. And I have to say, I keep thinking I've seen everything, but I have never seen a debate like that one. You can talk about it if you want to, but
yes, please.
Yeah, there's that, and then you just you go on and on and on, and everywhere we look, there are things for us to worry about. So how are we processing it? We're doing the best we can. We know every day we can't cover everything, but at the NewsHour, we try to examine what's going on and figure out what matters and and try to get our arms around it.
Well, I think one of the things that our viewers appreciate so much is that if anything can be calming at this point, is really nice to watch you all in the news hour without a bunch of talking heads and shouting. We really need that moment to kind of process a little bit. As you mentioned, you've covered every presidential election since 1976. And I watched you after the debate this week, and you did say that it's like nothing you've ever seen. So give us a little perspective. I mean, what was loading up your Twitter feed right after this debate?
Well, thank you for not revealing that I actually go back to the Garfield administration.
Ah, okay.
I go back a long way. No, but you're right. 1976 was the first campaign. I had just joined NBC News, and Jimmy Carter, I have been covering politics in Georgia and Atlanta. The governor of Georgia was, lo and behold, he was the nominee of the Democratic Party that year. And after that, I came to Washington. But you're right. We've never seen anything like what we're seeing this year. We haven't seen an administration like this one. And for those who love Donald Trump and love his approach to governing, it's one thing. And for those who are opposed, I think there are very few Americans who are undecided. When you look at the polls, people feel very strongly one way or another. Most people do who pay attention to what's going on. But in terms of the debate, Sandy, I mean, I expected that the president would be aggressive. That's who he is. That's how he rolls. But I did not expect it. And I don't know anyone, I mean, of all the people I've talked to in preparation for covering the debate, I don't know anyone who expected him to have this constant interruption, constant commenting, constantly speaking over Joe Biden. And as it turned out, Joe Biden gave as good as he got at some points. He had some pretty choice comments to make about the president, calling him, as we heard, a clown, and at one point saying, "You're the worst president we've ever had." So there were some very strong comments from him as well. But I think it's fair to say the president dominated the stage, dominated the debate, for better or worse. And we will see what happens in the public opinion polls, and then we'll see what happens. And I think there will be second and third debates. The debate commission is saying they're going to change the rules. It's interesting. We haven't heard anything about it yet. I'm sure they're discussing among themselves, what to do. I mean, how do you control a candidate who doesn't abide by the rules that the campaign agreed to?
I think I saw today where the president interrupted Biden 128 times, and that's a lot in a short period of time. Though I do wonder. We've sort of, the general thought after the debate was, President Trump created a train wreck. The polls certainly seem to show that. I wouldn't say so much that he lost the debate, but it was just people were highly irritated, and he probably didn't help himself at all. But if he succeeded in preventing Biden from making his case and sowing even more distrust, in mail-in ballots in particular, could it be that he actually won the debate? And of course we know the Proud Boys are celebrating like crazy. So, it does beg the question, right?
No, you're absolutely right. I think the assessment of the people that I've spoken with, and nobody really knows until we hear from the American people. But I think the assessment is that it didn't hurt him with his base. They like this about him. They like that he's aggressive, that he takes no prisoners. That's the Donald Trump they want. They want him to be a disruptor. And he's been that since 2015 when he came down that escalator in New York City. I think you get to make a very good point though, Sandy, in that if he's trying to sour the American people on the democratic process, if he's trying to make people believe, throw their hands up in the air and say, if this is the way it is, I'm not even going to vote. And we did hear some reaction like that. At the same time, in the Biden camp, you hear them saying, and I've talked to people in the last 2 days who say that this is going to energize the Biden base. We will see. I do think that it's possible that the president was thinking, the more I can throw everything up in the air and see where it lands, the more maybe people who are undecided who might have voted for Joe Biden may just decide to stay home, that it's just not worth it. That's a very sad thing if that's the case, and it's even sadder if that was his purpose. Of course, we don't know that, but there are those who are saying that perhaps he deliberately, he went out there deliberately trying to, frankly, discourage and just to cause people to despair
Yeah.
about our system.
Yeah. You know, you've moderated more than your share of debates. Uh, you know, and I have to say also, you know, have to give a shout out to Gwen Eiffel, who it was her birthday, you know, this week, and
This week,
your longtime co-anchor. And so I know many people were wishing that, my gosh, you know, what would Gwen have said, right? What might Gwen have done? Kind of the, you know, I don't play this game kind of stuff. Do you think anyone could have managed that debate?
I'm sitting here just imagining as I'm listening to you, Sandy, I'm thinking of the look that
Yes.
he would have given the president
Mhm.
as he was going on and on. Gwen had a way of giving you a look
Yes.
or giving someone a look when she didn't feel that they were being straight with her. Um, I think it's challenging for anyone. I'm sure there are some things that might have been done differently by the moderator, Chris Wallace, but if to the extent the president or any candidate is determined to speak over everyone else and not to abide by the rules, I think there's a limit to what you can do. My understanding is that the commission, though, sets very precise, it's a multi-page document that they put forward, the candidates sign. So for them, I don't know how much leeway the moderator actually has. Did Chris Wallace or would any other moderator have the ability to shut the mic off
Yeah.
or say, I mean, I've said to some colleagues, I think what I would have done at one point is just say, Mr. President, we're going to take a break now. We're going to just
Yeah.
stop. Everybody's going to take a deep breath for 60 seconds, 2 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
till we can all calm, and then come back and we'll start with an attempt to have questions and responses as we're supposed to have. But that didn't happen. I mean, Chris Wallace had to make the decision that he did. And now we'll see what the commission does, whether they change the rules.
Yeah, it seemed like the car left before he said start your engines, right? It just started whoosh. You know, after the 2016 election, there was quite a postmortem about media coverage as well, and particularly about Washington media and of course cable. And I think we've seen, you know, over and over that sometimes the best journalism gets drowned out by the taking the bait news cycle is what I might call it. You know, and the president is particularly good at this sort of, you know, dropping a little nugget and deflecting, and then it literally can take over one or two news cycles. So where do you see this balance? I mean, how do we maintain balance in this coverage?
It is challenging. Why? Because of just what you put your finger on, and that is that this president is a master at making news. I mean, he's a virtual news making machine. He has learned that both through the use of Twitter and through his power as president, he has the ability to sign an executive order, one an hour or two an hour. He could churn them out. And in fact, in recent days, we've seen a lot of executive orders having to do with rolling back environmental regulations or rulings having to do with immigration limitations. There is a constant churn of activity at the White House. My understanding of the way it works is the president gets up and whenever he shows up at the office or when he's communicating with the staff, it's what can we do today? What can we do right now? And it's a steady stream of activity, action, statements, Twitter for the press, which is used to paying serious attention to the president of the United States. This is the most powerful person on the planet. So we're accustomed to paying attention to them. But I have to say that after 3.5 years of the Trump presidency, there is now, I think, we're better prepared, I think. And when I say we, I can only speak for the NewsHour, but it's my sense the other media is not to jump every time the White House issues a statement or every time the president tweets.
Mhm.
We pay attention. We cover it if we think it's newsworthy. Some of us, I think, pay way too much attention. When I say that, I mean some of us in the media pay way too much attention to the president's random statements or comments or
Mhm.
declarations, comments in a speech. I don't know how many of you stay up late at night and watch his campaign rallies. We've been watching them this week. He's making some very, I should say, questionable statements about
Mhm.
other Kamala Harris. I mean, last night he had a campaign rally in Minnesota. So wherever he is, he's the news machine. And I think we've made some progress. To get back to your question, Sandy, I don't think we've made enough. We've got, if he's reelected, the news media has to do a much better job of figuring out a way, a fair and balanced way to cover this president.
Well, it's a little tough too when there aren't, press conferences. There aren't really opportunities to, ask questions and get reasonable answers, right? I mean, he's also kind of churned through, churn through others in his administration, his spokespeople, and when his voice is mostly heard on Twitter, that's a real challenge. I mean, Twitter is all about, sort of taking the bait and where do we fly, right? I
Right.
can't even imagine how, how do we wrangle this?
Well, it's frankly a process of figuring out hour by hour, day by day, and hour by hour how I'll put it another way, of taking a deep breath, something I mentioned a minute ago about the debate. Take a deep breath, step back, and say, what really matters here? How much, for example, in covering the debate, you had to cover what the president did. It was the lead, of course, by far, the
Mhm.
reaction to the debate. You also had to cover Biden's statements, and by the fact that Biden a few times during the debate hesitated in his answer or didn't finish or
Mhm.
didn't seem to finish what he seemed to want to say. We had to cover all of that. But on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, we have to sit back, look at it, and say, all right, is this environmental statement making enough of a difference that we should spend time on it? Is this statement by the Director of National Intelligence? I mean, just tonight on the program, on the NewsHour, we spent several minutes, my colleague Nick Schifrin, talking about a statement released by the president's hand-picked Director of National Intelligence. He's a former conservative Republican congressman, Mr. Ratcliffe, John Ratcliffe. Whereas in the last couple of days, he's released a statement that turns out to be Russian disinformation.
Mhm.
And this is coming from the person who sits at the top of the American intelligence community. So we decided that this is important enough for us to take the time, look at it, bring on a former director of a national intelligence director and someone who's an expert. My colleague Nick Schifrin did the interview, and look at it. What does it add up to?
Mhm.
And we have to make those judgment calls every day. We can't do everything, and we're certainly not going to ignore everything either, because I know in the first couple of years of the administration, people would email me or stop me in the street and say, why do you cover his tweets? Why don't you wait? And the answer is that he's the president. And
Mhm.
if he's making a statement, for example, he announced Middle East policy in a tweet.
Mhm.
He has announced what he was going to do in Syria a few years ago in a tweet. So we have to look at each statement, weigh it, decide how important it is, and frankly, use judgment. And it's the collective judgment of our NewsHour team. It's our executive producer. I'm very involved, of course, in all these decisions as managing editor as well as anchor.
Mhm.
So it's trying to put ourselves both in the shoes of the American people who depend on us for information they can trust, but it's also, frankly, the sum total of our years of experience covering Washington.
Yeah. So, m- give us a little window into what your average day is like, if there is
Well,
one.
the days roll into the nights, roll into the days. I mean,
Yeah. Let's
I,
not stop a day,
although
right?
I have to say that my colleagues who work harder than anybody you've ever heard of are Yamiche Alcindor, of course, who covers the White House for us.
Yeah.
I don't think that woman ever sleeps.
Yeah.
Nor do I think my colleague Lisa Desjardins, who covers
Yeah.
the Capitol for us. They are both 24/7. And even though the NewsHour is a 5-night-a-week television program, our digital uh, team is working nonstop around the clock, covering, making sure that our website and our social media presence is up to speed with whatever's going on. So I think I work a long day. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
up early in the morning. We have, I will say that we all are trying to constantly absorb incoming news, statements, columns, books, articles, tweet, the wires. Remember the wire services?
Yeah. Yeah.
We
Yeah.
all covered it.
But you're also, you're kind of catching incoming from all kinds of sources who, how do you decipher the ones who have an agenda, right? And the ones who actually have real information that you find useful?
I think I've developed a little bit of radar, or antenna or whatever,
Yeah.
where I can kind of tell. But the fact is, you never can be completely sure. You have to, you want to look. I mean, when somebody sends me an email and they say, here's a link to a story, I'm always looking to see what is the source. And if I don't see it in the link, first of all, I'm not going to click on something if it's not from someone I know. But if I click on it and it's an article that I can't tell who wrote it or where it came from, or if the sources are not named, we're going to be careful with that. There are some sources that are better than others. I mean, if it's an established news organization, if it's coming, say, from, I don't know, from another network or from the New York Times or the Washington Post, or, an established news, even then we're going to wait. We're not, almost always not going to go with one source. We're going to wait till we have at least two, and frankly, preferably until we can confirm it ourselves. But to get back to your other question, we have a meeting at 9 o'clock. It's all on Zoom like this. Sandy, we've got a screen with 25 of us on the screen, and then there are many more 25s to come. If we keep moving, there are about 150 of us on the staff, and we talk about the news of the day. We talk about what we should cover, how we should cover it, and then finally who should do it. And then all that is subject to change all day long. We spend the day pursuing the story. I'm on the phone, reading, talking to each other until I just around the corner from where I'm sitting here in my library is, they call it the Judio. It's the studio in my in my home, and there are a lot of wires and lights and cameras and wires, and that's where I anchor the NewsHour. So, and that ends at 7 o'clock. But as I said, I mean, the day keeps going. Even when I got off the air tonight, there was a story breaking about Kimberly Guilfoyle, who is the girlfriend of President Trump's son. The story about her in the New Yorker magazine, which one of my colleagues flagged. So we're always reading. We're always reading.
Yeah. This might be a good time to talk a little about trust. We know sowing trust is a strategy, and whether it's about scientists, intelligence agencies, mail-in ballots, the post office, military leaders, we can go on. And of course, journalists are right in the middle of that and have been a frequent target. Not the first time. I mean, we know, it feels worse now, but we know trust in journalism is always on the attack because people know what we do, which is that we try to seek accountability, right? But a few years ago, when you were accepting the Walter Cronkite Award, you said, "I am not an enemy of the American people. I love this country." And so why did you feel compelled to say that?
That was at a moment, thank you for reminding me, that was at a moment when the president was repeatedly making that statement about the American press. He had said it repeatedly during the campaign in 2016, and he was continuing to use that phrase as president of the United States. And it had gotten to the point where, frankly, wherever I went, people would ask that question. If I'm talking with the public, the question would be, why should we trust you? The president says X, Y, and Z, and I don't mean everyone, but I mean many people. And I felt it was important to make a statement that I'm not fake news. I don't make up the stories that I report. I am all about, as the NewsHour is, trying to be as credible as possible. That doesn't mean we never make mistakes. And I make a distinction between news that has a mistake in it, then I make a distinction between that and what the way the president uses the term. He was basically saying that any news story he didn't like was fake news. And we also have to be especially careful about that right now, because we know there's so much disinformation out there.
Yes.
We know what the Russians and others did in 2016. They are hard at it again this year in 2020, making stuff up. I mean, today there was a report, Sandy, I'll tell you, I read it this morning. Facebook, the Trump campaign purchased ads on Facebook, which basically had pictures of Joe Biden with an earpiece, saying that he relied on an earpiece or messages from others, I guess, during the debate. And it was a doctored photo. It was absolutely false, but they have that running on Facebook. So I think, all of us as news consumers in this country now have to be on our toes. We have to be more careful than we've ever been to look at the source of the information people are sending us, that we're reading, that we're seeing on TV or on this screen that we're watching, and make sure that it's something we can trust. It's a greater burden on the consumer.
Yeah, and our job has become so much about fighting disinformation. We're certainly seeing that with coverage even of mail-in ballots, right? Where much of this is still tied up in litigation, or obviously the president doesn't want people, voting. So it's a really difficult piece. We were, talking about that today in my own newsroom. Where do we need somebody whose only beat is to cover ballots, right? And so it makes me think, how are you all sort of planning for coverage of the election? Because we know it's not going to be election night. It's likely to be, we don't really know, election week, election month. How are you planning for that?
Well, for the last, I would say, month or more, we have decided to make a special assignment, really two, but one in particular, William Brangham. We've asked him, my wonderful colleague, to focus specifically on efforts to either by legal means or illegal means, by ballot challenges, by just any number of methods that can be used by the two political parties, by state officials, to be able to report on that on election night. And you're right, we don't have any idea what's going to happen. I mean, this election could end up being a landslide for President Trump, a landslide for Joe Biden, and anything in between. Close election, sort of a close election. But you're right, all the signals we're getting from the president right now are that they're going to do everything they can to slow down mail-in ballots. You also have, just today, the state of Texas, the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, said that there will only be one mail drop-off point in each county in Texas. Mm-hmm. Well, Harris County, which is the home of Houston, has a population of 4.7 million people. So he's saying there's one drop-off. What does that say to you about how much they want to hear from people who, for whatever reason, can't get to vote on election day or can't get to one of the few early voting days? So this voter suppression, attempts to shut down voting, come in all forms, and we have to cover it. So William is going to be covering that. We're going to have him. He's spending a lot of time right now getting familiar with the rules in all 50 states, especially the so-called battleground states. We know a lot of states where the election's likely going to go Democratic or likely going to go Republican. But frankly, there are more battleground states this year than we had expected. Mm-hmm. So he and his team are having to spend a lot of time looking at how laws are changing in Pennsylvania, in Florida, and other places. So we're looking at that, and but all of us are going to be frankly assigned to be as transparent as we can in talking about this. We've got people lined up that we're going to talk to that night, lawyers and others. We know that each of the campaigns has a battalion of lawyers they've got deployed, ready to deploy if there are questions about ballots in different states. But you're absolutely right. This is now a big piece of what election night coverage is going to look like.
Yeah, it's going to be so critical to prepare the nation for potentially what could be coming in terms of all these challenges, because it's going to be easy for people to sort of take the mic that night, right? And it's something that we've not seen before. Again, we don't know how long this is going to go, and with more time, there's more opportunity for.
Although the one thing I will say is that what we saw in 2000, and I happened to be with CNN that
Yeah.
year, but what we saw that year in not having a result that everyone could agree on election night and going 37 days and waiting for the Florida courts, legal challenges, and ultimately the Supreme Court, and then Al Gore graciously conceding. We do have a history of that in this country.
Mhm.
Young people
Mhm.
don't remember that very much, but somebody like me who's been around forever, I remember it. And we've talked on our staff about how important it is that we remind the American people that we do know how to have a peaceful transition, even if there's a question about the results on election night. We don't want people to panic, for example,
Mhm.
um, and think that the world is flying apart because we may not have a result on election night.
Yeah, what's your sense of that? I mean, if Trump wins, what's your sense? And if he loses, what's your sense of where the
Well,
nation's going to be?
I think if he wins, he will be. I don't think he'll challenge the result.
Yes.
I think I think we can assume that if it's a clear win, I think that Joe Biden has said on multiple occasions,
Mhm.
he said, if I lose fairly, I will concede. I'll accept the results. The president, on the other hand, has not said that. He has said that he's not, he can't say right now what would happen. He has said that he would concede if he lost, but only if it was proven that it had been a fair election, leaving, and then he proceeds to talk about mail-in ballots and so on. So I was just tonight in interviewing a man who runs it's called the Presidential Transition Project. It's a nonprofit that works with the incumbent administration and with the challenger campaign to frankly get ready for transition. Right now, there are Biden people in the federal offices getting ready to get more accustomed to what's going on in case Biden wins. If he doesn't win, they leave the day after the election or the day after we know the results. But there is an orderly process underway right now.
Mhm.
I asked him, I quoted from a woman, she's with a group, I think it's called the Transition Integrity Project. I think it's based at Georgetown University. They have said in their research that if the election is anything but a landslide, there is real reason for concern that
Mhm.
we will have unrest in the streets of the United States. I certainly hope that's not the case. That's what they have said. It's based on their research, their reporting around the country. I really don't want to believe that's possible, but I think we have to be prepared for it.
Well, there's a lot that's happened this year that we weren't ready for, so we're going to hope for the best. Historian John Meacham, I think, said even just today that he thinks it's really the American people on the ballot and not necessarily Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Do you think that's true?
You mean that this is an election between
Well,
President
this is an
Trump and the American
election.
people?
This is an
I didn't see
election
the
that's
quote.
yeah, this is an election that really is about, are the American people going to choose democracy uh, and
Over.
rather than a candidate? Right, right.
He's getting at the increasing sense that this president has moved in an authoritarian direction, that he has made changes in the way the federal government works, in the people he's put in important slots, key slots throughout the government. And these are people who report to him, who are politically loyal to him above their allegiance or loyalty to the country. At least that's been the allegation. Um, I think that's something the American people have to take into consideration. Um, I don't want to believe that Donald Trump or any president would ultimately do something to harm our democracy, would put himself or herself over the good of the American people. But frankly, what we've seen over the last 3.5 years it means that we have to ask ourselves that question. You know, are we watching the fraying of democracy in this country? And the debate the other night, in flouting the rules of the debate, somebody might say, well, that's just a debate. But it is part of the orderly process of helping the American people understand who these two candidates are, what they believe, where they want to take the country. And if you can't have that conversation for the American people, those who haven't made up their minds or who they want to hear more from Joe Biden and President Trump. If you can't have that conversation, that harms our democracy. And so I do think there's something to that.
Yeah, to be determined. I see a number of questions in the chat about politics, so we're going to get back to politics. But I wanted to ask you about a couple of other things. Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Did you know her? Did you, what are your thoughts? I mean, her passing, even though we knew she was ill for such a long time, I have to say it was shocking when it actually happened.
I did know her. I don't pretend to, we were not close friends, but I did know her. I saw her on a number of occasions, was able to speak with her on a number of occasions, interviewed her a couple of times, including about 6 years ago. I sat down and interviewed her and two other women Supreme Court justices from other countries, from Israel and from Canada. And they had just a remarkable conversation about their careers coming up in the law, joining the court, what they faced as women. They talked about international law, the difference between their countries, how the courts operated in their countries. But mainly, of course, the most fascinating part was hearing them compare notes as women at the highest level of the judiciary in each one of these democracies. She was every bit what you saw. She was quiet, soft-spoken until she decided to look up and make a statement. And it was powerful. She didn't, she was not a person of small talk. But she was always, always interested in it. And how are you? How is your work going? How is, she would ask me about news decisions, about how we had made a decision to cover a story and how hard it was to do that. Mm-hmm. She would ask about my career. And she was this way with so many other people, women especially, but also men. I mean, she took a genuine interest in the people around her. You heard that from her law clerks, from virtually everyone who knew her. And then she had the whimsical side. I was at an event where she was, it was at someone's home. They actually had opera singers come and perform for Justice Ginsburg and others. And she loved the opera. She loved having a good time. She loved her work, and she loved her friends and her family. It was a life absolutely fully lived, and she's missed.
Do you think sort of the assumptions of what the court is going to be? I think it's pretty obvious that this justice will get through. Do you think sort of the assumptions of what's to come are true, or you think the court will rebalance in some way, and all of a sudden the conservative justices will sort of, there's a few more who might lean toward the middle and a few liberals who might lean in another way? You think it's as predictable as we think it is?
I think it's pretty certain that if Judge Barrett is confirmed, you will have at the very least 5 committed conservatives on the court. And the Chief Justice is also a committed conservative. But we have seen him increasingly play a swing centrist role. Mm-hmm. Not every week, not every month, but in key decisions, certainly on the Affordable Care Act, certainly on other pivotal decisions of the last few years. These conservatives have been angry at him. They've lashed out at him. President Trump has criticized the Chief Justice. And to get to your point, even the 2 conservative judges appointed by President Trump, Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch, each have in one or another instance voted with the liberal side of the court. But I have to say, if Amy Coney Barrett is confirmed, everything in her record makes her appear to be a committed conservative. You can have 6 conservatives, even if the Chief Justice votes with the progressives, you're still going to have a majority. I will say there was a story that came out today, late in the day, about in I think 2006, now Judge Barrett. At the time, I think she was a law professor. She and her husband signed a letter that essentially declared that Roe v. Wade was a travesty, and suggesting that it definitely should be overturned. And I think that being the case, she will get more questions about that. That every judge who goes before the Senate for confirmation tries to say, I don't have any opinions about any of these things. I've got an open mind. That's who I am. But the more they can be pinned down on their views, the more they're going to be challenged. I'm not sure that's a deal breaker for her, though.
Yeah, and the vote's not there, right? And I should note that you are one of the founders of the International Women's Media Foundation, which still continues today. And I think this year's award winner is Yamiche.
Yamiche, exactly.
Yeah, right.
IWMF, the International Women's Media Foundation, a group of us came together in 1989 and 90 to put this organization together to try to support women journalists around the world and in this country, and to support a free press. And I'm so proud to say that here we are 30 years later, and it's still going stronger, not just still going, but going stronger than ever. And in the last few years, in fact, in the aftermath of Gwen's passing, the IWMF created the Gwen Ifill Award for a rising a journalist of promise. And I'm just thrilled that the decision was made this year to name Yamiche.
Yeah, and I think Yamiche has met her promise. I mean, she's really powerhouse.
Oh, I think you're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
So I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we'll get some questions from our audience. In March, as the pandemic actually was just beginning to spread in the United States, and you also made a personal plea I think it was at the end of one of your broadcasts, for Americans to look out for each other, to be our best selves. And I was wondering what made you say that at that moment, because, you know, I think you can say that today. It's probably needed even more today than before. But what was it about that time that made you say that?
It's interesting, Sandy. There was a news story, or maybe a couple of news stories that day about the difficulty that the elderly were having getting just basic items at the grocery store. Tissue, disinfectant wipes, milk, eggs. People were going into the stores. This was early in the pandemic, and buying everything in sight, people who could afford to. And the folks with less to spend, including the elderly, would go, and there'd be nothing there because somebody had gotten it. And it just struck me all of a sudden that this is a moment to step outside the pure reporter role and to say something to the American people. I don't do that very often, but I thought that it just felt like the right moment to do it, but it was spontaneous. I read those stories and I thought, excuse the phone, I think my husband will get it. But I read those stories and I thought, if I'm ever going to say something, this is the time to say it.
Yeah. Do you feel compelled to say it again? I mean, I think, you know, a lot's happening, right? And it almost seems like the nation is a bit numb, and, you know, 200,000 people. I think when you said it, the numbers were much lower than that.
200, what is it now? Back then, I think we had
almost
maybe a dozen, you know, not even 100 in March. And then, of course, it all, you know, it exploded in the summer. I think we are numb in some ways, and let's hope that that's not going to stay that way. We can't be numb. This is a terrible, terrible disease, and we're all going to be together in trying to figure out how to move it on. I mean, you hear Anthony Fauci and Mr. Redfield at the CDC saying it's up to each one of us to wear masks. So that's going to be more effective than waiting for the vaccine, which is going to be who knows when, next year, the end of next year, maybe. We're not sure. We'll see.
Yeah. So we'll take some questions from our audience, and there are many. About trust, Dan asked, NewsHour and BBC do such a great job avoiding words and pictures and headlines and tweets that could look biased. reflect on whether the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC work hard enough at this, especially with so many viewers already skeptical about the bias that journalist bias and often egged on by the president.
They mention, this is Dan mentioned, the New York Times, the Washington Post, MSNBC.
CNN, MSNBC.
You know, without naming any other news organization, I think we are clearly in a period of heavy news opinion and strong, heavy and strong news opinion. And it's a different news world, news environment than the one I grew up in. I grew up being taught that nobody cares what Judy Woodruff thinks, go out and cover the news and bring it back and report it. And we've moved beyond that. Some of it is right now, I think, due to the polarizing effect that President Trump is having. People who love him passionately. They think he's he's exactly what this country needs. Others think he's exactly the wrong thing. And they feel it so strongly that they are, you know, it affects their thinking. Some news organizations have decided that part of their agenda is to promote the values that they believe in. And I think that to a point, that is, I mean, we're all for democracy. I mean, I'm not going to come on the NewsHour and talk about dismantling our system of government. You know, we're not going to do that. So I'm in favor of democracy. I'm in favor of voting. I'm in favor of education. I'm in favor of good health. So I'm in favor of all the things that, but getting beyond that, when you talk about issues, whether it's economic equality, whether you talk about issues of race, human rights, I think we as journalists have to think hard about what our role is. Certainly we are all for human rights. We are for racial equality. We are for economic equality. How far do we promote that in our reporting? Do we feel that we are obligated to spend a lot of time on it? And I think that that's part of what's going on right now. There's a strong reaction to what we've seen happen in this country over the last few years. And I think a number of news organizations are reacting to that.
You know, when Bob Costa was here a couple of months ago or several months ago, he said that the media wasn't covering white supremacy nearly enough. And Pennsylvania, by the way, is a hotbed of white supremacy organizations. Do you think that's the case? I mean, so many people seem kind of caught off guard by their organizations, by like the Proud Boys and others. What do you think?
I think we could all do a better job. I will say at the NewsHour, we have covered that story from the very beginning. Charlottesville, we gave that a lot of coverage. Just last night, we spent, I think, 2 separate segments, one entire segment on the white supremacy issue, if you will, and talking about the Proud Boys. What happened and what came out of the debate. It was the debate that led to that discussion. We intend to stay on that story. I mean, given the president's response when he was asked by Chris Wallace if he would renounce white supremacy, the president, I looked at the transcript, I've now read it several times. The president said, sure. And Chris Wallace said, he continued the question. He said, sure again. And then when he said, okay, the president said, okay, name a group. And Chris Wallace said, the Proud Boys. The president said what he said, you know, stand back and stand by, which was not the reassuring answer, I'll put it that way. And since then, the White House has given conflicting explanations. The president's press secretary said, first they said, well, he made it clear. He said, sure. And then later on, the president said, well, I didn't really know what Proud Boys represented. Today, I think on the campaign trail and last night, he's now saying he wants them to stand by, but every time, or stand down. Yeah, I think today he said stand down, or last night.
Well, stand down and go away are different things, right?
Yeah, but he adds to that, we also have to worry about violent or extremism on the left. So he's constantly bringing that up. And of course, the vast majority of extremist activity in this country is from the right. It's not from the left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think because we need just a little levity for a minute. Your job, Malcolm says your job looks really stressful, pretty stressful. What cocktail did you have after your interview with Kellyanne Conway on September 26th? No,
I'm trying to remember.
Right.
Might have just been a glass of wine. I don't know. No, that, I don't know which interview you mean. There have been several of them, but there was one, I think you're referring to the one at the convention. I can't drink during convention week. But seriously, it is a challenge to talk with her and with other members of the Trump administration. Their approach is quite clearly be on offense, stay on offense, and never, ever back down. And that means challenging the interviewer, dominate the conversation, state things that, in many instances cannot be borne out with any facts. And so it becomes an exercise in, shall we say, a difficult exercise. I tried during the convention, we interviewed a number of folks, obviously at both conventions. But what you see when you interview people around the president is, and members of Congress who support him, it's just this very aggressive approach and repetition of what they believe and what they say, even when it is not true.
To that point, someone asks, what does, I think it was Jane, who asked about the extreme division in our country. And is Trump the result of the division, or is he the cause?
I think you have to give him you have to say some of the responsibility is on his shoulders. I will not say all of it. This was a divided country, politically divided country before Donald Trump was elected. I remember the criticism of President Obama. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've been a politically divided country in many ways. We've had the Civil War. I've covered divisive elections. Every single one of them is divisive, but we are now off the charts. I've never seen it the way it is today. There is an animosity. There is a suspicion of motive. And to me, it started in the early 1990s. After Bill Clinton was elected president, there were many Republicans and conservatives who felt that he was a, quote, illegitimate president, that George H.W. Bush shouldn't have been defeated. And you remember Newt Gingrich came up with the Contract for America with a list of 20 priorities that were antithetical to everything Bill Clinton was trying to do. And they stood in the way of much of his agenda, not all of it. They were able to get certainly a number of things passed, including welfare reform. He worked with Republicans on that. But it was the start of this sort of implacable foe approach to politics. And we've seen that only grow more and more angry and determined to stand in the way of anything, letting the other side win anything. It's take no prisoners. It's scorched earth. It's zero-sum game. That's where we are right now, and it's tragic for our country.
John asked, why don't interviewers hold their subjects to account more and push back when somebody is clearly lying or just being evasive? Why so differential?
I came out of the Jim Lehrer School of interviews, and Robin McNeil, the founders of the NewsHour, who believe that the NewsHour should be a place for civil discourse. We believe in asking questions and letting people answer them. What has changed is what Sandy and I were just discussing, and that is the flood of interviewees today who will just declare that up is down and green is red, and that's the way it is. And you have a choice in those interviews, if you invite those people on the program, of interrupting everything they say, or letting them say something and then pointing out that is not borne out, that the other there's no proof of that, and so on. The decision, I think, comes in who do you invite on the show? Do you decide just not to have some people on because you think you're going to be correcting them constantly, or because we do believe in civil discourse on the NewsHour, that it will be offensive to the audience to hear that. And so it's a tough, I'm not going to lie, it's been very, very tough over the last few years. It's never been, it's never easy to put on a news program and do news interviews. You always want to do the best job you can. You want to understand at the end of the interview whatever the story is, whatever the issue is, better than when you went in. You don't want it to turn into just a slugfest, but increasingly we are called on to correct people and to say that that's just, that's not the case. It didn't happen. That was wrong, and so on.
So a couple of somewhat more personal questions is from Mary: how has the present political atmosphere changed your relationship with your friends? And why don't you answer that one? Go ahead.
Well, we're all working so hard. I don't even see.
Friends. When do we get to see our friends? Right?
I will tell you, a good friend of mine is Andrea Mitchell at NBC, and we're now reduced to texting each other. We try to we've seen each other distance. We took a walk early in the pandemic here in Northwest Washington, and my husband and I went over there to have supper with her and her husband, Alan Greenspan, out on their patio one night back in the summer. Socially distanced, masked, the whole thing. But other than that, we really haven't. We're all working. Everybody's working very hard. I stay in touch with distant family members in Oklahoma and Georgia and North Carolina as best as I can. I have a son who's right now in North Carolina. I have and I have a daughter and a son in Maryland and another daughter in Maryland. So I see them as much as I can, but mainly my husband and I are stuck with each other here at home. And he's pretty sick of me by now.
Right. Yeah, I think I read today divorces are going up, but I'm certainly not wishing that for you at all.
Thank you. Yeah, we're trying to keep our distance from each other so we make sure we preserve the marriage.
Yeah, there you go. Another question of, what do you recommend? This is from Katie. What do you recommend for teaching children about what fake news really means?
That is such a great question. I would say start talking to children as early as they understand how to talk, just to be skeptical, not to be cynical, but to ask questions. If somebody says something to you, ask why. I mean, some kid, my children would drive me crazy by asking why, but I'm saying you want your child to ask why, and where did that come from, and how do you know that? Just the basic questions that children ask. Those are the right questions. How do you know that? Where did that come from? Where can I see the proof? Where's the information? Show me. Let me see it. And how do you know it's real? All those things. I think you can talk to children at a very young age. I have a 2.5, almost 3-year-old grandson. I'm happy to say.
Congratulations.
He's may not be quite ready for this, but I would say by the time children are in school, you can start to talk to them about what's true and what isn't true, what's honest and what's fake. And children get that, I think.
Yeah. And I think it's fair to say that that same advice can apply to adults, right?
Sure.
Yes. Well, I think we're coming to the end of our time, sadly so. It went so quickly. So many more questions we could have asked. And Ralph, I think you say it the best. Thank you, Judy, for your service to our community. You are a national treasure. We so appreciate you spending our time with us. We hope to see you again after the election when you come up for air. But thank you. Thank you so much for your service, Judy.
Well, I very much look forward to coming to visit in person when I can. And thank you so much. Great conversation, Sandy. I thank you.
Well,
and
thank
wishing
you.
Everybody the best, and stay safe.
Stay safe. You and your family, and to all of our audience as well. Please stay safe. And thank you for joining us tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you. Enjoyed it. See you soon.